intelligence consultants. We started by reflecting on what I thought was quite a thought-provoking opening panel. All four speakers made some really significant points. I think we found some of the statistics that Shanaz shared pretty striking, the shift in the media narrative, which I certainly hadn't appreciated from previous to the sort of trajectory towards imbalanced reporting, which is really worrying. So we would try to understand what's the reason for that and why, what's driving some of the imbalanced reporting. And that's a very tricky one. I mean, I think it was mentioned, is it, social media bubble was mentioned, is the social media sort of revolution created a new type of citizenry where people have less inhibitions and they're just saying what they want, which in a face-to-face contact you wouldn't, and is that translating into the media, is that playing a part? But we also said, well, actually, is that too simple an explanation? There must be other elements to it. Commercial reasons were mentioned in the opening, so that's also a factor how money plays a role in these systems. And that led us to talk a bit about power structures. There's lots of unholy alliances between powerful media barons and certain politicians, and how that plays a role in terms of what kind of angle is taken on certain stories versus others. We wondered whether there's something around, we hear about institutional racism. Is there some level of institutionalized Islamophobia as well? So that's something we wondered about. It's not a term that's necessarily out there the way institutional racism is, but maybe we need to talk about that and challenge that a little bit as well. We reflected on the fact that the spike in hate crime and racism making a bit of a comeback post-Brexit is also a factor of why we're recently seeing certain things taking place. Are Muslims being targeted more than others? There's the debates around that, because I think, whatever community you're in, I think it's a fair point. You may feel, it's all against me, but other communities are also facing challenges. And, we had interesting discussions around other examples, the fact that even one of the leaders of one of the major parties, Tim Farron, felt he couldn't reconcile his faith and staying in a mainstream role. So that was interesting. But generally speaking, Muslims do feel as though, the message being given, from media sources and elsewhere is, if you want to get on, then you have to abandon your faith. And if you have religiosity, then you're somehow strange or weird. But we also reflected that there's generally, it's not so much about this religion versus that religion. There is a bit of an anti-religious dimension to an increasingly sort of secular, atheist and what have you, agnostic environment. So it's not just Muslims facing that sort of pressure. We had our colleagues, Turkish journalists, who were talking about how interesting sort of dynamics can happen amongst journalists. So he gave the example of how he gets treated a bit differently as a foreign journalist compared to British journalists. In one case, physically being nudged aside, so that some of the more establishment journalists can get forward and get coverage. But I know, Susan, you made the point that you even have TV turning up and knocking off others just the same. So it's an interesting dynamic that needs to be looked at. But because Dr. Salman's book was around language and linguistics, we did reflect a bit on language. We felt that the language and choice of words was sometimes ignorant, sometimes intentional, inflammatory, provocative. For all those reasons we talked about, maybe it just sells better, commercial reasons, and so on. Words and misnomers, abound. Terrorism. What does that really mean? And it's often used as a sort of, decontextualization was mentioned earlier. There's no explanation around why. Oh, because of this, and they're doing that, and it's very simplistic, and there's no real nuance in the way. But let's jump onto, actually, before I jump onto solutions, which I think are really important, do you want to add anything from what we covered and talked about on observation? The touch on some of it, anything you want to add?
Only to reiterate, I think the social media side of things is
significant.
One more thing about local media and national media, the big differences.
Do you want to elaborate on that at all?
Yeah, because I'm here waving the flag of the Liverpool Echo, and we are a local brand, and we are a world away from Daily Mails. And I thought it was just important to kind of get that over that Daily Mail has a very set agenda, and we all know what it is. Your local media should not be like that. The Liverpool Echo is not like that. So in order to engage, maybe, and to try and find a solution, maybe it's worth starting at the very bottom, with the weekly newspapers, with the weekly brands, and then building.
One thing I would just contribute to that, though, is I mentioned in my speech this morning, I just slightly take issue with you. So in that the comments in local papers are often not, very well moderated, and you get a lot of bigotry in the comments. Comments on stories.
You are quite right.
So that's one issue, and unfortunately there are commercial dynamics in all publications, and I admit to it ourselves in terms of broadcast media. So I don't think we can sort of claim to be without that whole thing. But I think it's nuanced. There are nuances.
We're very different to some of the national press.
Okay, all right. So a few other observations before we come on to solutions, because we can obviously highlight the problems all day. Just from my group, just to see if I've missed anything, and I'll come on to you for comments. Yeah.
When we talk about media presentation of these Muslims, I think in general we're looking at national media. Even Salman books refers to all that media outlets are all national media. But in my experience and having discussion with some of the people today who are from local media, I think local media are far more balanced as opposed to national media and less biased, so to speak, in terms of Muslim representation. I think the local media element of how the local media reports a Muslim community or a particular faith community has not been analyzed in the same way the national has been. And I think if you do, you will see that local ones are far more positive. And so perhaps we need to have much more engagement with the local media and then create a trajectory or a traction towards the national media.
Well, it'll be interesting to see the facts of that up and down the country if that's actually the case. Let me just run through some of the solutions and then we'll open up to the rest for any comments, because I don't want to take too much time. I know after lunch we call it in our training profession the graveyard shift, because obviously it can be a little tiring with the food that we've had, very nice food that you've arranged. I think some very simple ideas were suggested which can be powerful, and increasing dialogue and just talking, the tea gatherings and having different stakeholders, people from different backgrounds getting together. In many ways what we've done here in terms of having, for a lot of us, we may be in the academic space or in the business space or in the journalist space, and our paths don't cross quite as frequently, and that can help. And I think some of the studies from Cardiff to Edinburgh and elsewhere talk about how misunderstandings, xenophobia, Islamophobia reduces when there's greater interaction and awareness. And some analysts talk about how the way in which, say, a Muslim mayor's campaign was attacked it backfired because in London, 1 in 10 Londoners are Muslims, so everyone knows they're Muslims, so they didn't really believe what was being said. So that awareness and knowledge and getting to know Muslims and say, oh no, actually they're not all, and that can have an effect. Whereas I remember in my own experience when I worked in the private sector in a company where I was the only Muslim, and in fact there weren't many people from the BME community. For a large number of them, they've never met a Muslim before, and they would come up to me and say things like, "It strikes me, Nabeel, just how different you are to those Muslims I see on television." So I'm like, okay, well, I didn't have to say anything. If that helped, then I'm glad to have been helpful in that regard. But to go meet a Muslim, they're out there. But it works both ways, because there's also insular issues amongst the Muslim community, and that point was made that we need to open up a bit more and reach out a little bit more as well. What else did we talk about? We talked about the need to create networks and platforms where this can happen. We talked about how we also need to promote new voices, not the same voices and community leaders and what have you. So that was also something, we talked about how not enough women, including the Muslim community, are given a platform or a voice. Media training came up, bringing more attention to the lot of good work that is happening in Muslim, Christian, Jewish and other communities. So perhaps we need to get better at our own PR and get those stories out there as well. Recognizing that, sometimes they don't get engaged. Regulation did come up briefly. We talked a bit about regulation. I think the broadcast media is a bit better regulated than the print space, and maybe that needs to be looked at. And finally, schools and looking at ways. But I know, it's a double-edged sword, as was mentioned earlier with school education. But I think the point we made was, is there a way to equip children to take a critical approach? The old saying, don't believe everything that you read in the press. So making sure that children are being educated in a wholesome fashion through real interaction with human beings, not what they're reading in the social media, which can give them a skewed perspective overall. Anything I've missed, guys, from my group before I open up for general comment?
I think you covered it very well.
Yeah, is that okay? So I'm going to hand back to Dr. Salman to take any comments, but I know our friend here wanted to. Shall we just take that one point? Yeah.
I just wanted to respond to, not to you directly, but this notion of local and national media being somehow, good versus bad. As a consumer and as someone who's been featured in your Liverpool Echo media before, I fail to see the difference in terms of sensationalism and all the same kinds of prejudices coming through. Other consumers in the city as well, I think, widely share the same views, especially amongst social justice campaigners. So I don't think that's a premise that helps us in where we're trying to get to, which is just in general a more healthy media. I don't think there's any sector that can wash their hands off and say they can.
Everyone needs to play a part in changing and getting a more sort of balanced and fair level of reporting. Okay, all right. Thank you very much. That's from us, really.
Thank you, everyone. I think the summaries have been really good. I appreciate if the moderators send me their summaries to me, then we can. Would you mind turning off the lights there, please? Because we've got good lights, that's a good thing, but PowerPoint presentation can be a little bit difficult. What I want to, sorry I have not given any break at this point. We have lots of things to cover, and at the end of the day we'll have our tea, coffee, and then we'll go. So I think in that way we can cover. So I was thinking of, a lot of the participants today asked me, what's next? What do we do next? So I was thinking of how do we take this forward? And of course, the panelists in the next session can give very useful suggestions, and at the end, people will give more suggestions. So I was just thinking, in light of just starting with how media. We tend to sometimes overemphasize the negativity of the media, but media can play it's a double-edged sword. It can be a force of empowerment, but at the same time, in many cases, it can be a means of subjection. It can establish commonness and foster solidarity, but at the same time, it can induce in divisions, deepen misunderstandings, reinforce prejudice, and distort reality. It can be a valuable instrument in recognizing otherness, embracing differences, and promoting cultural awareness, but at the same time, it can have a divisive effect through their indifference to difference. And finally, it can put in perspective the diversity of groups and individuals with a great deal of authenticity and frequency. And in doing so, they can facilitate intercultural dialogue. But at the same time, can act as an instrument of marginalization, dismissal, and effacement, and function as a source of divisiveness, polarization, and estrangement. So we can see, if we can judge ourselves by looking at the media, how the media actually portrays, and it can have. So through dialogue, through efforts, we can't give up. We can't just say, oh, they're negative and that's it. So like programs like this, we're having more programs like this, we can try to get the positives out of them. And so that is the efforts I think we can all think about. But we need to get a perspective. This is something we got, it's from a new statement. Chris and Susan, and you could correct me if there is any change. But if you just look at this perspective. So 2 of the 99 named witnesses says at the Leveson inquiry into the press are from ethnic minorities. 1 of the 100 most important media people in the Guardian's 2011 guide was not white. 0 national newspaper editors are non-white. 0 national newspaper political editors are non-white. Reports of, it's from the hideously white political lobby behind the scene, there's been a report, And then national newspaper comment pages do not reflect the diversity of 21st century readers in Britain. And that is a perspective, and the cultural awareness and misunderstanding or ignorance or all these things that come can have that perspective. We can think from that perspective.
What year are those figures taken?
2011.
2011.
Yeah.
Because Amol Rajan was the editor of The Independent.
I'm taken from the New Testament, so there can be. That's why I said that you can.
Well,
there can be some differences. But so independent rights. So I think we do have some. So we all know this. We all know that Muslims are negatively portrayed. It affects British Muslims. There is academic evidence for that. There is lack of cultural understanding. We discussed all these things. But what can be done? So that is a crucial thing.
Sorry, can I just interject there?
Sorry, yeah, sure.
Because you did say we could potentially respond. Statistics, down lies and statistics. The question I would ask really for that is, how many candidates for those
absolutely. I mean,
were turned down
yeah.
at interview or were excluded from an interview process? Because if no Muslim or ethnic minority or BN candidate went for those jobs or were available for those jobs, then it's a grassroots thing,
Yeah.
How long ago do we need to go back to look at where the gaps were in the recruitment, and or indeed, for example, a number of communities some time ago, it might have been the case that the Muslim community would have discouraged the young people from entering the media because it was seen as something that was not something they ought to be doing.
Yeah,
so I don't think
can we come back later on?
The statistics are one thing. Actually looking at the dynamics of it are another.
Sorry. I mean, absolutely, I agree. I mean, I'm not saying that this is.
No.
It's not a conspiracy theory. It's about what's the reality.
It's a reality.
It's a reality.
We have to
yes,
quickly.
I think it needs to also be said then by that notion, black communities are actively discouraging their children from becoming academic professors. We know that's not the case, but there's hardly any of them. So there's another layer to it, and that is with what messages are we giving as a society to different groups of people, saying what careers are suitable and unsuitable.
Kind of institutionalized racism.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's think of. So of course, I think what we have done today, of course, not to a great extent in terms of mainstream media involvement. I mean, Chris, you raised about NUJ. I did approach NUJ. They did reply and say that I will contact you, and then they did never contact you. So we have to work on it. So this is something, as far as I'm concerned, a big challenge we need to take up to actually discuss and engage with the mainstream media. So ideas are very much welcome, and we need to. This is something we need to really do. So the reality of the 21st century Britain we need to take into consideration. So media practitioners need to understand Muslims and other faith groups more. Muslims and other faith groups need to actually engage with the media much more. We discussed that. We came with these discussions. And as academics, what we do, we publish and we do nothing else. We get our rep reviews, we get our book reviews, we do our, at the university level, we have our publications, that's it. How do we engage? How do we get our, findings, involve people with the findings? And I think the reason in the REF, the aspect of impact case study, and this is actually part of my impact case study of my book, the organization of, and this conference has been funded by University's Impact Fund. So that's how, I think academics have a very important role to play here. But I don't know how many of you are aware that some conversations have started. So there are two recently held events in Wales which are significant. So this hashtag, if you can follow that, Reporting Belief 16, when they did, when religion makes the news. So in November, NUJ Training and ITV Wales organized this workshop. So brought together around 80 people, journalists, faith group, media representatives, experts and other interested parties, and they wanted to look at how the two sides can work together. So work has started. This is a very good thing. I have spoken to the person who actually organized that several times, and we are thinking how we can create partnerships and how we can learn from their experience and what we can do. And the main aim was to promote religious literacy by offering participants expertise, resources, and the opportunity both to examine their own personal standpoints while honing their professional skills. Then there was another one recently in May. So it says the two communities who often clash, journalists and believers, came together, around 88 people. 44 were journalists from press, broadcast, and online media. And the aim was to enlighten journalists to making connections with different belief groups and to understand communities. And there was an immediate groundbreaking result when ITV Cymru Wales offered to do a series of feature reports of around 3 minutes on their nightly news shows, Wales at 6, on a range of belief groups in Wales over a period of around a year.
Fantastic.
And then there were those who participated. Just like someone wrote a blog and said, I took this from this blog. This is Will Hayward, who is a reporter of the Media Wales. He said, overall it was a really productive day. One of the things that surprised me, which perhaps shows my naivety and why this training is important, was that to describe the Muslim community is misleading. It is not a amorphous single entity, but rather something multifaceted and hard to pin down. Pretty obvious when you think about it, but clearly I hadn't given it enough thought. And then what he did is, following the horrific attacks in Manchester, the reporting belief event certainly helped me develop links for a story I had to put together for the Western Mail magazine. How Muslims feel seeing the awful news of a terror attack. And he was one of the writers, particularly with regard to awareness of the diversity within the community. So we can see a clear result, of course. This is started just the beginning. So what can we do? I was thinking as an academic, these two workshops involved journalists and faith groups. But I think as an academic, I think we have an important role to play. So I feel that academics who work on religion and media, they also need to get involved in this conversation. Like setting the context of future events, share their empirical research, which is, they talk to real people. I did focus groups to different types of people, and which I put together in the group. This is not the part of the extract I sent you, but this is what we did. And then journalists can also, of course, get involved, learn from the research findings and share their untold stories of processing and producing these stories. So what goes in them now? We have had the journalists who have shared during the workshops. The Muslim community and other faith groups can share, like many have done today, how news stories affect their lives. So there's Michael's workshop group really encapsulated that well. And eventually, we can try to develop some shared ideas that can help the media produce stories that are fair, accurate, and culturally sensitive. We must have that aim. We don't know when we'll achieve it, but we need to carry on trying that. So what is the next stage? Finally, so I'm thinking of applying for an external funding to organize more events like these in places like London, Birmingham, Manchester. And I am looking for partnerships, academic colleagues, journalists, and faith communities. Anyone who are interested can join. We can, collaboratively, we can apply for funding to organize more events, more effective events, where we can get journalists very actively involved, and I think that will be very good. So if anyone is interested, please contact me. We have this hashtag and the Twitter account. We have the Facebook account as well. So continue this conversation. I have already seen that people who are not here, quite a few people tweeting about it, commenting on the tweets that we have been giving. So some of you have been tweeting. So I think let's continue that conversation. And we also have a dedicated YouTube channel. So all the discussions that we are having today, most of the speeches, we will individually upload them on that YouTube channel and share and send it to journalists and for people to engage. So let's work together to take this conversation forward, and I hope